So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. We are 2 days away from the Detroit Lions and the Kansas City Chiefs opening up the 2023 NFL season on Thursday night. And as we are just 2 days away from this opening game, I wanted to take a look at it. I want to take a look at the two rosters, take a look at how the teams played last year, take a look at the additions and losses both teams had to overcome this offseason, as well as take a look at the matchups, strengths, and weaknesses of both sides to give the best indication of how this game is going to look and who is going to come out on top. So with that being said, let's get right on into it, starting off with the Detroit Lions. Now, taking a look at the Detroit Lions. Last year, their offense was incredible. Although it did have a little bit of a bumpy road in between weeks 4 to 7, the Detroit Lions offense finished as one of the top units in the NFL. For the first month, they were the highest scoring team in football, and they finished the season pretty good as well. They finished as 5th in total points for an NFL offense, 3rd in total yards for NFL offenses, and 1st, having the fewest turnovers as well as the fewest sacks allowed in the 2022 season. The offensive line was elite. Jared Goff played like a top 10 quarterback. The weapons were good enough, and the Lions finished as a top 5 offense in all of football. The problem, though, and the reason they went 8-9, the reason they started 1-6 was a defensive effort. The Detroit Lions ranked 29th in points allowed. They ranked 32nd in yards allowed, but they were middle of the road, ranking 18th in takeaways a season ago. Now, taking a look at the Kansas City Chiefs, they were first last year in points for, first last year in yards for, but they did rank 25th in turnovers. They were one of the higher teams as far as giving the football away, which is something the Detroit Lions can lean on, knowing that the Kansas City Chiefs will probably turn it over at least once or twice, right? Kansas City, known for their creative play calling, known for their big plays, but with that comes a lot of big risk. And of course, with the big plays, with the dangerous throws, sometimes that's going to lead to interceptions. Sometimes it's going to lead to Patrick Mahomes holding the ball too long. Sometimes some of the tricky stuff is too tricky for the offense to understand, and the turnovers do come. So if the Lions are able to force a turnover, they're going to have to take advantage of it, but there is a good chance that they will be able to force at least one, if not two, takeaways from this Kansas City offense. Now, ranking the defense of the Kansas City Chiefs, last year they were very middle of the road, 16th in points, 12th in yards, and 21st in takeaways. The defense wasn't good, but it wasn't bad enough to lose them games. They came away with some timely takeaways in some games. They came away with some timely stops, but overall, they weren't a very high-ranking defense in any statistical category, being right around average to below average at most, if not all, defensive metrics a season ago. So this is shaping up to be a really high-scoring game, right? A high-scoring affair, something with a lot of points, a shootout very similarly to Monday Night Football in 2018, where Jared Goff and Patrick Mahomes dueled out for the highest-scoring game on Monday Night Football history and one of the highest-scoring games in NFL history. Now, taking a look at the Detroit Lions, they added a lot this offseason, mostly through the draft and a key few free agents. Of course, Jahmyr Gibbs was your first-round pick. Jack Campbell will captain the defense, while Sam Laporta and Brian Branch should be really good role players that were grabbed in the second round. The Lions also added in free agency with Cam Sutton, Emmanuel Moseley, as well as C.J. Gardner-Johnson to bolster their secondary to put alongside Jerry Jacobs, Kirby Joseph, and Tracy Walker, making what should be at least an average secondary in the NFL. Obviously, C.J. Gardner-Johnson led the NFL in takeaways a season ago. Obviously, C.J. Gardner-Johnson led the NFL in takeaways a season ago, with Cam Sutton having 3 of his own and being very, very good. And of course, Emmanuel Moseley having a good career with the 49ers, unfortunately shortened due to injury. And the Lions really didn't lose too many people, right? All the wide receivers that walked out, DJ Chark left, but he was replaced with Marvin Jones Jr. The Detroit Lions added a lot more to their offense and defense. They added a ton of depth and they added a number of playmakers, but they really didn't lose anybody. They didn't lose a single member of the starting defense from a season ago, and of course added Sutton, Mosley, Johnson, Laporta, Campbell, Branch, and so on and so forth. So the defense, talent-wise, on paper, should be much better, while the offense obviously replaced Jamal Williams with David Montgomery. They replaced DeAndre Swift with Jahmyr Gibbs. Two upgrades, in my opinion. They upgraded the tight end position with Sam Laporta in the second round. The offensive line is still top 10, if not top 5, if not top 1. And of course, the wide receivers are just as good, if not better, than the position looked this time a year ago. Taking a look at the Kansas City Chiefs, they added a couple guys as well. Rashid Rice obviously being the second round pick and looking to be one of the top wide receivers on this team, as well as Felix Anudike-Uzomah, the first round pass rusher from Kansas State. Through free agency, they also signed Jawan Taylor as well as Drew Tranquill, two guys that should be starting and impacting their offense and defense. Jawan Taylor likely being the starting right tackle, while Drew Tranquill may not start at linebacker, but should have a role in the defense, being a pretty big get for them this past offseason. However, unlike the Detroit Lions, the Kansas City Chiefs did have a few key losses. Those, of course, being Orlando Brown Jr., your starting left tackle from the Super Bowl run. He ended up being a Cincinnati Bengal after this offseason. Juju Smith-Schuster, one of your top receivers from a season ago, ended up going to New England and, of course, is now a starting wide receiver there. Frank Clark, your playoff pass rusher, you're a guy that always comes in clutch in the big games, always comes in clutch in the playoff, and somehow becomes a top 10 pass rusher every time the postseason comes around. He is officially gone and no longer a member of the team. I believe he went to Denver. And, of course, Mecole Hardman, a player that was a deep threat for the Legion of Zoom, is no longer there as he is currently a New York Jet. Now, are these losses unsustainable? Are these losses things that are going to cause the demise of the Kansas City dynasty? I highly doubt it. Likely, the Kansas City Chiefs have even improved over losing these players. However, Orlando Brown was a big part of their team. Juju Smith-Schuster was a good part of their team. Frank Clark was a good pass rusher for their team. And although I do think they've replaced Frank Clark with Felix Anudike-Uzomah, although I do think they have replaced Juju Smith-Schuster with Rashid Rice, and of course Orlando Brown with Jawan Taylor, it is still losses and still new players for the team. And I don't really trust the player that they replaced at left tackle, replacing Orlando Brown. I think that will be their biggest loss this season. Now, taking a look at matchups for this game. As far as the Lions offense goes, I think the Lions offense outclasses the Kansas City defense by a wide margin. I think our offensive line should be able to move around the Chiefs defensive line, especially if they do not have Chris Jones in the middle. I think our offensive line will be the biggest strength of our team. I think we'll be able to run the ball efficiently. I think we'll be able to give Jared Goff time in the pocket. And I don't think Kansas City's secondary is necessarily good enough to hold up in 4 or 5 seconds of coverage with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Marvin Jones, Sam Laporta, and Khalif Raymond. Obviously not necessarily the best guys in the NFL, right? No elite wide receivers. There are no top 5 guys like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, but Khalif Raymond and Amon-Ra St. Brown in specifically are guys that can create separation, get open, and if you give them enough time, they will beat you over the top and they will beat you for some big plays. I also think that our running backs and our tight ends will be able to match up very well versus the Kansas City linebackers. I think linebacker is the biggest strength of the Kansas City defense. They have a lot of really good athletic playmakers there, but I do think Jahmyr Gibbs should be able to make some plays. He, of course, is in a class of his own when it comes to speed and playmaking. You have Sam Laporta, I think, will be able to stretch the field and block downhill, if nothing else. I think he will be very impactful in minute ways, not necessarily on the stat sheet, but I do think he will be a big factor of this game, either as a decoy or having 1 or 2 big plays to take eyes off of guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jahmyr Gibbs. I do think that, again, I think Kansas City's linebackers are very good, and I think they very well could win this matchup. But I think because of all the additions the Lions had, with Ben Johnson being the former tight end coach and scheming tight ends open better than anybody in the NFL, having your running back core of course, David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, just playmakers with that offensive line, I do think the running back tight end duo will beat the linebackers. Now, again, like I said, I think the wide receivers will beat the DBs. If given enough time, Amon-Ra St. Brown will work open against anybody. Khalif Raymond is a super underrated wide receiver. Marvin Jones, again, a veteran guy that knows exactly what to do, where to be, and when to be there. You, of course, have guys like Antoine Green who can make an impact. You have guys like Josh Reynolds, who can make an impact, a very deep wide receiving core, not necessarily with the top-end elite X wide receiver, but a lot of really good depth and a lot of really good playmakers that Jared Goff has a ton of chemistry with. And then, of course, I would take Ben Johnson's creative play calling over any defensive coordinator in the league. I do think Ben Johnson is going to be our biggest advantage in this football game. And if he can score points, I think it's going to be up to Aaron Glenn and the defense to get us some stops. Moving over to the Chiefs offense, I do think our tackles are better than, I do think our edge players are better than their tackles. I do trust Aiden Hutchinson. I do trust James Houston. I do trust, Charles Harris and some of the other edge rushers to get the job done and to get home against the Chiefs offensive tackles, especially against the left tackle. However, I don't think our defensive line on the interior is going to quite match up as well versus the interior of the Kansas City Chiefs. Creed Humphrey is a top 5 center in all of football. Joe Thuney is a very good interior offensive lineman. And of course, I like Aleem McNeil. I like Levi Onwuzurike. I like Benito Jones and Broderick Martin and all the players that they've brought in. But realistically, they are not a top 5, top 10 positional group in the NFL. And I do think they could struggle on the interior. I think that's where Kansas City could get a little bit of a push and could get a little bit of momentum offensively. Going back the other way, I do think Kansas City's running backs and tight ends will match up very well versus our linebackers. Our linebackers are Alex Anzalone, Jack Campbell, Derek Barnes, and Malcolm Rodriguez. 4 guys that I think are very good at the position, but nobody is equipped to cover Travis Kelce. I think Jerick McKinnon out of the backfield will be dangerous. I do think Isaiah Pacheco could break off a couple big runs, and all of their wide receivers, all of their running backs, all of their tight ends are just very, very talented. Our linebacking core is young, it's unproven, and I do think, of course, especially with Travis Kelce, they will get the win there. But I do think our DBs are better than their wide receivers. Rashid Rice isn't really a separator. Obviously, you have a couple other guys there like Justin Ross, who's an undrafted free agent, who looks very good in camp, but still has a lot to prove. I think Kansas City's wide receivers have a lot of upside, but until that they prove that, I think talent-wise, our DBs match up very well versus their wide receivers. However, I think the biggest thing the Kansas City offense is going for it, obviously other than Patrick Mahomes, from the wide receiver perspective, is the scheme. Andy Reid schemes open wide receivers really, really well. Kadarius Toney is very good at creating separation, right? A lot of motions, a lot of movement, a lot of trickery, and it is hard for a defense to cover. So even though I think our DBs one-on-one would match up very well versus KC, I am very worried that the scheme will allow the wide receivers to have separation. The scheme will allow wide receivers to make plays, and I am worried that Andy Reid will be able to make plays versus our secondary and will be able to get his wide receivers open. And of course, obviously, with them focused on Travis Kelce, you're not going to double wide receivers on the boundary. Now, taking a look at more matchups, I do think the Detroit Lions are a deeper football team. And I think if you go matchup by matchup, you go position by position, the Lions have more winning matchups than they have losing matchups in this game. However, the Kansas City Chiefs have the 2 biggest victories in this entire game, in the entire league. They have the best head coach in the league, and they have the best quarterback in the league. And overall, that pretty much trumps any matchup that you're going to have, right? Yeah, the Lions might be a deeper football team. Yeah, the Lions might match up better, more around the field on paper. Their matchups might be better, but nobody matches up with Patrick Mahomes, and nobody matches up with Andy Reid. And for that reason, I think Kansas City should be the favorite in this game. Although I do think, again, this will be a very high-scoring game. I think this could come down to whoever has the ball less, could come down to a turnover by Mahomes, a turnover by Andy Reid. And I do think this game is within reach of the Detroit Lions because, again, they are deeper. They do have better matchups across the board, but it's impossible to bet against Andy Reid. It's impossible to bet against Patrick Mahomes, especially in week 1. So with that being said, I do think the Kansas City Chiefs are going to take this. I think it's going to be a high-scoring offense. I think it's going to be a really entertaining game to kick off the NFL season. It's in Arrowhead. The Chiefs have home field advantage. They have the best head coach in the NFL. They have the best quarterback in the NFL. And even with subpar wide receivers, even with not the most talented defense without Chris Jones, I do think Kansas City takes this. I think Patrick Mahomes is going to will his team to victory. Patrick Mahomes has never lost a week 1 game, has never even thrown an interception in a week 1 game. And I do think Kansas City is going to edge out the Lions in Arrowhead. But I think after this game, there's going to be less people talking about the Lions as frauds, less people talking about the Detroit Lions as the most overrated team in football. And I think they're going to be put on the level, maybe not as the Kansas City Chiefs, but certainly on the level of, hey, this team can compete with anybody. This team can score with anybody. Now we have to see the defense rise to the occasion. And if they can be a top 15, 16 defense like the Chiefs had a season ago, they are more than capable of winning a division title, a playoff game, and maybe being a dark horse team for a Super Bowl run. But with all that being said, that is all for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below how you feel about this matchup. What matchups do you agree with? What matchups do you disagree with? What players do you think are going to be the key impacts of this game? And who do you think will inevitably come out on top Thursday night in Arrowhead? I'd be very curious what you guys think. But with all that being said, that is all for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.